The Nebraska Cornhuskers versus the Illinois Fighting Illini used to be an annual Big Ten West rivalry. Like, it wasn't really a rivalry in the sense that Illinois versus Northwestern is, or Nebraska versus Iowa is. However, they played annually in the same division, so you had that divisional rival component, like, let's say, Michigan State did with Ohio State when those teams were competitive, or Michigan with Penn State. But divisions are obviously gone now. Rest in peace to the Big Ten East and the Big Ten West, and USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington have expanded the Big Ten Conference from 14 to 18 teams. So there are some changes in the Big Ten, and there will be some games both for Nebraska and for Illinois and every other team in the Big Ten that will be uncomfortable in conference play, unusual, that will feel maybe like a important, critical, non-conference game, but they really are a conference game. This is not one of those, though. This is a familiar matchup. And right now, Nebraska's favored by 8.5 points at home. The line opened up at 8.5. Illinois is traveling to Nebraska, a place where they have won repeatedly. The last time they lost in Memorial Stadium to the Cornhuskers was in 2018. Over a half decade ago, little over a half decade ago. So these two teams, they know each other. They matched up last year where Nebraska won in a hard-fought 20-7 victory behind Heinrich Harburg to give the Cornhuskers some momentum. Of course, Nebraska then went 0-4 in November, finishing 5-7, but Illinois finished 5-7 as well. Neither of these two teams went to a bowl game, and right now they're both 3-0. They're both ranked in the top 25. Illinois is 24th, and the Cornhuskers are 22nd. This is a Friday night game that takes place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time. And I'm excited for this matchup. There's a lot of excitement surrounding this matchup, and we're going to deep dive it, get into it, and talk about the matchups, the rosters, the coaching staff, and I'll give my prediction too. But before I do that, I want you watching this video, to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, share this video around and my channel around to other college football fanatics like us, people who love the sport. And also hit that notification bell so that you can get notified when new college football content from us drops. And comment your thoughts, your analysis, your preview, and prediction down in the comments section below. I love interacting with you all. Liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, and sharing this video around help boost engagement. They help get us into the algorithm, get more viewers, more people to comment with you and I about the different games in the beautiful sport of college football. And if you want to donate to the channel, my Patreon page and merchandise store, the links to those are in the video description and down below in the pinned comment. I also, lastly, encourage you to check out our Discord server via the link in the pinned comment and also now in video descriptions. Join our Discord and you can talk about college football 24/7 with other dedicated fans. And speaking of dedicated fans, Nebraska has some of the most dedicated fans in the country, and with this being a night game, it's going to be loud. So just pencil that in as a factor right there. Home field advantage in college football is different than the NFL, where it's really just assumed to be a 3-point swing in favor of the home team. In college football, I'd say it can be anywhere from 0 points if, for example, you're Northwestern right now. You don't really have much of a home field advantage, at least one that's not larger than a high school's home field advantage. Or it could be 1 point, 2, 3. I could argue that it could go as high as 4 or 5. And I think for Penn State and Ohio State and Michigan and Alabama and Georgia and these bigger stadiums with also dedicated fan bases, even 6 or 7 point advantage for the home team. Nebraska's definitely higher than 3 in my mind. I think you saw that in the Colorado game where Colorado's offense, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, Jimmy Horn Jr., LeJontay Wester, Dallin Hayden, specifically those players. Look, I don't think Shedeur Sanders is this near elite, not even close to an elite quarterback like some people talk him up to be, but he's good. He's great. And he did not play a good or even great game, not even close, in Memorial Stadium. And the night environment and the fan base was a big part of that. But I want to move past that because you can just pencil that in. And ultimately what matters more when teams match up is how they play on the field. The fan base, the crowd noise, that's almost like a condiment. That's a side of a side to your French fries and your burgers. Let's get into the meat of this matchup. Looking at things from a bird's eye view, Nebraska is viewed as the better football team. And there are other analytics and statistics that I'll give you, but let's start with Football Power Index and SP+. Nebraska, per FPI, is 9.1 points better than the average college football team. Per S&P Plus, they're 12.4 points better than the average college football team. Illinois is 3.8 points better than the average college football team per FPI, and 6 points flat better than the average college football team in S&P Plus. S&P Plus is tempo adjusted, and I think it cares more about a variety of stats and is more diverse and balanced and less reactive compared to FPI. FPI is very reactive. I mean, even later in the season, it can be very reactive, which can be an upside, but can also be a downside. I like Bill Connolly's S&P Plus more than FPI, but it is also behind a paywall, just as a side note. Like, if you want his entire rankings, you got to go to ESPN.com and sign up as a Plus member. But FPI is also a great metric. Clearly, the analytics think that Nebraska is the better football team, but Illinois has risen rapidly in these rankings, especially after they beat Kansas and game-controlled them. They dominated Eastern Illinois, and Eastern Illinois I know is an FCS team, but it was still an impressive win. Nebraska has had their own share of dominant performances. They've been dominant in every game they've played in so far this season, and you see that in their points per play margin, where on average, they have a points per play margin of 0.314 over the opponents that they play. Pretty impressive. And you see that in the fact that they beat UTEP 40-7. They beat Colorado 28-10. And they beat Northern Iowa. I keep getting Northern Iowa and Northern Illinois mixed up. Pardon me. But they beat Northern Iowa, 34-3. They've been 3-0 against the spread. Illinois beat Eastern Illinois 45-0. They beat Kansas 23-17, and they pushed against Central Michigan, beating them 30-9. Illinois is not too far behind in points per play margin. On average, they have a 0.236 points per play margin over their opponents. And from what I understand, points per play margin's basically saying like how dominant you are, not adjusting for strength of schedule. How dominant are you over your opposing teams? Like, do you get more points per play on average against your opponents? That's what a positive points per play margin means. If you're in the negatives, that means on average your opponents are earning more points per play than you do. So it's a measurement of both how dominant you are and also how efficient are you with scoring. I think it's a very good indicator of who the good teams are, who the bad teams are, and who's actually going to end up winning the national championship. This early, the latter probably doesn't apply, but as you get through the season, you'll typically see one team or maybe just a very small cluster of teams way at the top. Those are your biggest national championship contenders. In game control, this is another statistic where Nebraska is much better than Illinois in. They're 6th in game control, which adjusts for strength of schedule. Illinois is only 43rd. But I will tell you, Illinois' defense has played some phenomenal football, forcing turnovers. They won the Kansas game because of a pick six. They've done a pretty darn good job of defending against the pass, and they also have done a better job at passing the football, with Zachary Franklin in particular, who's made some very impressive catches, and Pat Bryant and their quarterback Luke Altmaier, than I would have expected from a preseason angle. And Illinois has faced a slightly tougher strength of schedule, which I think checks out because Kansas is better than Colorado. The analytics would say that. My eye test would say that. But it's not like either of those teams are top 25, at least right now, to be fair. Illinois is the 102nd best strength of schedule. Nebraska is the 114th best strength of schedule. Just looking at this from a bird's eye view. And when you dig deeper, I look at these rosters and how these two teams want to play ball. They want to ground and pound. They also want to pass the football more than perhaps they would have in the past because their personnel have improved in the passing game compared to last year. I think, given the constraints of the game and of these two teams, it's Illinois' quarterback and wide receiver core, which did pretty well against a Kansas defense that features Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant, some of the better cornerbacks in the nation, and good defensive linemen, good linebackers. And Illinois performed pretty well against that Kansas defense, which is, after this game, it's going to be the second best defense, only behind Nebraska, that Illinois played all season long after this game. And it's way better than Central Michigan and obviously Eastern Illinois. I'm telling you, Kansas, their issues are purely on offense with Jalen Daniels. Their defense is pretty good. And it's Nebraska's defense that is on the opposite side of this matchup. How does Illinois' quarterback, Luke Altmaier, and his receivers handle a Nebraska defense that includes players like M.J. Sherman, Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmacher, Tommy Hill, Marquise Buford Jr., Malcolm Hartzog, Isaac Gifford? How do they handle it? That's really what this matchup is. That's what I think this game will come down to. Because Illinois' secondary so far this year has looked very improved compared to last year's, a lot closer to the 2022 unit than the 2023 unit. And Dylan Raiola has upside, and he's played consistently well. And he'll take the check down if need be. He'll go explosive if need be. I mean, he's a proven quarterback, I think. I know it's only through 3 games, but looking at his efficiency numbers and watching him on tape, he's only going to get better as the year goes on. He has a good supporting cast, and he has good receivers. He's also at home, which means he's probably not going to be as rattled, potentially. He doesn't have the same potential to be rattled as Luke Altmaier. And Luke Altmaier had problems throwing picks last season and turning it over. This year he's looked better, and he has some lethal receivers. I mean, it was tough seeing who had the better receiver room between Illinois and Nebraska. And I think that the Illinois defense and the Nebraska offense, they're going to battle, and maybe Illinois can shut them down, but also Nebraska could definitely score points on them. I think the cloudier area is, can Illinois' offense move the ball and not rely on their defense to score points to win this game in Memorial Stadiums. That's why I have Nebraska's defense against Illinois' quarterbacks and wide receivers as the critical matchup in this game. When you look at the offenses, Nebraska, I think, clears Illinois at most positions, with one exception, and that exception being wide receiver. Nebraska, of course, has Isaiah Nair. They have Jamal Banks. They have Jalen Lloyd. They have Carter Nelson, Ja'Cory Barney Jr., Janarian Bonner, and then at tight end they got Thomas Fidone II and Nate Borkacher, Luke Lindenmeyer. They have a lot more depth at not just wide receiver, but also tight end compared to last year. And this is an underrated receiver core. And Ramir Johnson, running back, has gotten involved in the passing game a lot too, and that's really, really nice to see from him. He's been utilized quite a bit this year, both on the ground and also through the air. You look at Illinois, though, and their receiver core, and they got Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. I think, looking at Pat Bryant and how he's performed, he's probably the best wide receiver on both of these teams. And Zachary Franklin may have the highest upside out of the wide receivers on both of these teams, outside of maybe Bryant and Nair. But I do think, looking at the targets, the receptions, and how these two teams have played, that Nebraska's the deeper receiver room. So upside goes to Illinois at receiver, depth goes to Nebraska. Nair's had 187 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Pat Bryant, by comparison, 235 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. And Zachary Franklin has 193 receiving yards. So I did a push for their wide receiver room. I didn't think it was worth, going 51-49 one way or the other. I think it's more respectful just because of the massive gray area and the fact that both of these receiver rooms are good and they're pretty equal, then I'm just going to leave it really up to your interpretation for wide receiver. And I don't think that changing that matters a whole lot with the overall offensive profile. Raiola is better than Altmaier. He's the better quarterback. He has a higher QBR. He has a higher passer rating, a 162 passer rating, compared to, actually it's Luke Altmaier who has the higher passer rating. Altmaier has a 164.3 passer rating. Raiola has a 162. That's probably because Altmaier's thrown an additional touchdown pass and he hasn't thrown an interception, because Raiola is averaging slightly more yards per attempt and is completing more of his passes. So it's totally the fact that Altmaier hasn't thrown a pick, and he's also thrown an additional touchdown pass. But I'm telling you that their passer rating's about equal, but Altmaier has a 60.1 QBR, which is 41st. You look at Dylan Raiola, who has a 79.2 QBR. That's 24th. And Raiola is a younger player, a player who has more upside, someone who, I just look at his deep ball, and he has a very strong arm, accurate. I don't think the interception against Northern Iowa was really on him, although he did take a risk, and that part is on him. But Nebraska gets it at quarterback. They earn it at running back, where they have just tremendous depth there with Dante Dowdle, Emmett Johnson, Ramir Johnson, as opposed to Illinois' own Caden Fagan, who's a good running back, and they have Khalil Valentine backing him up. But I don't think they have the same depth or even upside at running back that Nebraska does. Tight end, it's not even close with Thomas Fidone, Carter Nelson, and Nate Borkacher. In fact, Illinois' leading tight end has 2 receptions for 21 yards and a touchdown, but they haven't used him much in the passing game. And as for the offensive line, Nebraska's averaging nearly 5 yards per carry, and they've only allowed 1 sack. Illinois is averaging about 4.4 yards per carry, and they've allowed 5 sacks. So O-line clearly goes to Nebraska. It's the same thing with the D-line for the Cornhuskers, and I'd also say slightly linebacker. Secondary's a push, and if you break it up, I think corner goes to Nebraska with Tommy Hill, but safety goes to Illinois, because whether it's Miles Scott or whether it's Xavier Scott, both at defensive back, both at safety, they've combined for 5 picks already this season, including a pick 6, and those 2 have also combined for 2 forced fumbles. Illinois' secondary has 6 interceptions, 1 pick 6, 7 passes defended, 4 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries. And a lot of those forced fumbles have indeed gone to the defensive backs and the linebacker core. As for Nebraska, they have 1 forced fumble and a fumble recovery, 11 passes defended, 4 interceptions, and a touchdown. I think that Nebraska's faced the better passing offense with Colorado and company. I think Illinois has faced a rushing defense that is probably better, or a rushing offense that's probably better than Nebraska's in Kansas, where they have Daniel Highshaw Jr. and they have Devin Neal, some of the best linebackers, not just in the Big 12, but in the country, and a really good offensive line. I mean, Kansas tested Illinois on the ground, and they probably should have ran the football more, but at the end of the day, Illinois won that game, and if you're an Illini fan, you hope that they learned a lesson from that game, because Nebraska will run the ball, just like Kansas did, and if they have to, they'll stick to it, and they don't have the same turnover issues at quarterback that Kansas did. Illinois has 5 sacks on the year on defense. Nebraska has 9. I think the defensive line, clearly with Nash Hutmacher and also Ty Robinson, Jamari Butler, Cam Lenhart, I think is better than Illinois, where they returned Tayra Edwards from last year, but they have a smaller list because they run that 3-4 multiple on defense. So their defensive line, I know that Nebraska also runs a 3-man defensive front, technically a 3-3-5, but Hutmacher and Robinson almost make it feel like it's a 4-man front. Not even kidding. Those are some of the better defensive tackles in the Big Ten right there. At linebacker, you look at Josh Krutz, you look at Dylan Rosiak. Is that correct by ourlads.com? Because there's also Josh Krutz, starting at center. I don't know if that's right, but Dylan Rosiak and Seth Coleman are starting at linebacker. And for Nebraska, that's John Bullock, Mekhi Gabayer, and Stephon Thompson. So it's close at linebacker. I leaned Nebraska because I counted MJ Sherman and Princewell Unman-Malin as linebackers because they can be, they're in that jack position. They can be a defensive end and line up on the defensive line, or they can be at linebacker. But that's close. If you want to argue that Illinois is better at linebacker, I'll hear you out. In the secondary, of course, it is razor thin. I think safety goes to Illinois. Corner goes to Nebraska. Trench warfare and special teams. Trench warfare is often what wins the Big Ten. It's what wins the bigger college football matchups. And special teams is a very small part of the game, but size doesn't always matter. And it sometimes can be a bobbled punt, bobbled snap. It can, be a muffed kickoff or a missed field goal that determines a game. And I'd have to give Illinois a strong advantage on special teams. Illinois is one of the leaders in the nation in field goals made per game. Now, if, you want to score touchdowns more than field goals, but if you can get a field goal, and David Alano's been good, 6 of 7, 85% of his field goals are made, his one misses from over 50, and he has a long of 50, you'll take him as your kicker. Nebraska's Tristan Alvano was 3 of 4 on the year with a long of 31, and he missed one from inside 40. 75% of his field goals have been made. So I think at kicker, Illinois has an edge. Brian Buschini versus Illinois' Hugh Robertson. Hugh Robinson's one of the Big Ten's better punters. I don't think there's a big advantage there for either side, but if I have to go with one, it's Illinois. For punt returner, you have Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda and also Ramir Johnson returning kickoffs. Mac Restich and Kanari Wilcher return punts and kickoffs for the Illini. I just got to side with the Illini mainly because of their kicker on special teams. But in the trenches, I think Nebraska's the better O-line and the better defensive line. So that's that. Trench play definitely goes to the Huskers here. And finally, for coaching, offensively, I went with push because I don't really trust Marcus Satterfield. And Barry Looney Jr., I think, has done a good job during his tenure with Illinois of finding ways to run the football, of getting quarterbacks to play respectably. Like in 2022, for example, Tommy DeVito was one of the Big Ten's better quarterbacks. This year, it looks like Luke Altmaier could be one of the Big Ten's better quarterbacks. But I think Matt Rule, as it stands right now, is a better head coach than Brett Bielema. I think that Tony White's one of the nation's best defensive coordinators. And while Aaron Henry has done a much better job this year than last year, I still need to see more out of him, though he's an elite secondary coach. And as for strength and conditioning, I would give that to Nebraska too. They look like a physical bowling ball right now, sort of like how Illinois looked in 2022, and I don't see that right now with the Illini. Again, they're better than last year, but not quite their 2022 selves, at least from what I can tell. Though then again, through 3 games in 2022 when they lost to Indiana, they did not look like a good team with great potential. But I think Nebraska wins, and I do think they cover. And well, I think that Altmaier and his receivers and Fagan on the ground and that interior offensive line for Illinois and their tight ends with a great game plan, and Brett Bielema being a really, I think, good coach when you look at how he does as an underdog, I don't think they'll be able to finish in the red zone. I think the Illini will be able to move the ball pretty well, pretty efficiently between the 20s. But once you get past that 20 and the field begins to shrink, and therefore you have to do a better job of fitting the ball into tight coverage or really, really pushing yourself in the ground game, I think Nebraska, having the better quarterback and the better trench play, allows them to be the more efficient team, the superior team in the red zone. That's why I have them winning 31-16. That's 4 touchdowns and a field goal for Nebraska. I get Illinois kicking 3 field goals, but only scoring 1 touchdown. I wouldn't be shocked here if Illinois actually wins the turnover battle, but not by much, maybe just by 1. They're very effective at forcing turnovers, and not necessarily getting points out of them, but just getting stops via forcing turnovers. And I think that whether it's a fumble or whether it's Raiola again making a risky play, there's a possibility of that. I'm not including that in my prediction, but I just want to say that I think Illinois can win the turnover margin, but the turnover margin in this game, while important in every game, I think the biggest thing for Illinois is they have to convert in the red zone. They have to get touchdowns. Luke Altmaier, Zachary Franklin, and Pat Bryant, and their tight ends and receivers, and also the tackles and the pass pro, they need to step up. As for Nebraska, pound the rock, don't turn over the football, and play good defense and don't get burned by Illinois' great receivers. Again, my prediction is Nebraska covers the 8.5-point spread, and they win 31-16 on Friday night at home. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for sponsoring this video as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Slane, Honolulu OH, Ismar, Tyler 9, Jolton Cush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Seo, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video and channel as all conference members. The link to my Patreon page, where you can get access if you're an All-American or Heisman member, $10 and $25 a month respectively. You can get access to my picks for the week, which will release typically every Thursday afternoon. I already have them in place. I'm just waiting for the lines to shift and for my research to be done on the rest of the games that I'm covering. It's mostly already been done, but you always have to touch up on a few things. And then they'll release on Thursday. So if you want access to those, sign up on my Patreon page. If you want to support the channel in a different way besides Patreon, you can purchase from my merchandise store. That's in the description and the pinned comment as links. Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. Go Big Red, and go Illini.